Number 10. Bill Shirk. The most famous magician and escape artist of all time is Harry Houdini, and one of his most notorious stunts that almost killed him in 1915 was being buried alive. Since then, there have been several people who have attempted the stunt. One of the most famous attempts, because of how it went wrong, was performed by Bill Shirk in 1992. Shirk, who was clearly not in the same ranks as Houdini, for some reason thought that he could make the stunt even more dangerous than Houdini. Instead of just being buried under dirt, Shirk also wanted to be buried under cement. So, on that fateful day, Shirk was shackled, placed in his plexiglass coffin, and was lowered 6 feet into a grave. Then 6 tons of cement and dirt was poured over the top of the coffin. Now, plexiglass is strong, but a casket made from it is not strong enough to hold up 6 tons of dirt and cement. So it collapsed nearly immediately, and Shirk's team slowly dug him out of the ground. He luckily survived the attempt. Number 9. Kristen Johnson. In January 2009, the spectators at a Detroit Pistons game got to see something rather unforgettable while watching the halftime show. On that day, escape artist Kristen Johnson performed the infamous water torture cell escape. The stunt involved her being shackled and then submerged in a glass tank full of water. For reasons that should be obvious, Johnson only had a limited amount of time to get out of the tank. After trying to free herself for 2 minutes and 50 seconds, she started to panic, and then she hauntingly goes motionless. That's when her team jumped into action and tore the top off the chamber and pulled her out. Luckily, after a few seconds, Johnson regained consciousness and waved to the crowd, who were cheering, probably thankful they didn't just witness a woman's drowning to death. Number 8. Unnamed Bulgarian magician. Here, there are 3 paper cylinders, and under one of them was a sharp knife. All he had to do was slam his hand down on the paper cylinders that didn't have the knife under it. It is just like 3-card Monty, but instead of winning money, the magician could suffer a horrific hand injury. And that is exactly what happened. He lost track of where the knife was and slammed his hand down on the wrong cylinder, stabbing himself through the hand in the process. He quickly pulled the knife out and tried to act like nothing had happened. However, it became clear that he botched the trick, and the host had him show off his battle wound. Number 7. Ryan Stock. On the 11th season of America's Got Talent, Canadian stuntman and guy who hangs stuff from his piercings, Ryan Stock, was performing with his fiancée, Amber Lynn Walker. They were performing a new stunt that they'd never performed in front of an audience. It involved Walker using a crossbow and shooting a flaming arrow at a target that Stock was holding between his teeth. Stock said that they had worked on the trick for months without a hitch, but during the live taping, there was a problem with the crossbow. As a result, it sent the arrow off its target and right into Stock's neck. Luckily, the arrow wasn't too sharp, and it didn't cut open his jugular. Also, he was lucky that his clothes didn't catch fire. However, their luck ran out when it came to juggling, and they were cut from the show. Number 6. Wayne Houchin. There are some people who don't know that magic isn't real, and that magicians just perform illusions. Real magicians aren't like Harry fucking Potter. They can't just say a few words and suddenly they are invincible from things like fire and bullets. And one of those people who didn't know the difference between magic and illusions was Franklin Barazat, who was a host of a popular morning show in the Dominican Republic. In November of 2012, American magician Wayne Houchin appeared on Barazat's show. Barazat surprised the magician by lighting some Aqua de Florida cologne on fire, and then proceeded to pour the flaming liquid over Houchin's head. Since, as we mentioned, Houchin couldn't actually do magic, the fire engulfed his head. Luckily, the fire was put out after a few terrifying and agonizing seconds. Houchin was taken to the hospital with first and second degree burns on his hands and face, but he survived. Bazart wasn't just fired from the show, he was charged with assault, and he fled the police. He's now a wanted fugitive. Number 5. Spencer Horseman. Spencer Horseman rose to prominence after being on America's Got Talent in 2012. He was eliminated in the third week, but he managed to use it as a springboard for his career, and he landed an opening spot on Chris Angel's tour in 2015. In June, Horseman, who was 29, was rehearsing his version of the water torture cell escape. During the rehearsal, Horseman suddenly lost consciousness while in the cage that was suspended 30 feet above the ground. His crew lowered his cage, and luckily they were able to save him. Now, you'd think that after one close brush with a horrific death, Horseman would have shelved the trick and started pulling rabbits out of his hat. But this is the guy who was cut third in America's Got Talent. He's not going to quit because he almost died and all. Pan Zabek. Magic fails aren't just associated with America's Got Talent. For example, this gentleman with the flashy haircut is Pan Zabek, who was a semi-finalist on Poland's Got Talent. In 2016, he and his assistant appeared on a morning talk show. Zabek was performing a trick where he would slam the host's hand down on paper bags, and under one of them was a long nail. Obviously, the plan was to hit the bag without the nail. However, that didn't work, and the host immediately started screaming. At first, the assistant laughs, before he realizes that the host has a giant fucking nail impaled through her hand. Zabek keeps the host's hand elevated, but it's clear that neither he nor his assistant know how to help the host, and the show cut away from the studio. The host was taken to the hospital, and she was released after getting some stitches. Needless to say, if you are attending this Zabek show and he asks for a volunteer, do not offer to give him a hand. Number 3. The Clown Magician. In 2014, in Trujillo, Peru, a local clown was putting on a performance for a group of children that included a magical act. What could go wrong, right? Well, adding fire to the show didn't help. In the trick, he was supposed to burn what looks like a thick black file folder, and then a bird would appear out of the flames. However, that didn't happen. The living bird caught on fire and then fell to the ground. As it burned to death, it writhed on the ground, and the children started screaming in terror. Undeterred by the fact that he probably mentally scarred a group of children, the magician carried on with the show. What a pro. Number 2. Tran Tan Fat. Number 1. Joe Burris. As we mentioned in the entry about Bill Shirk, there have been several people who have tried to bury themselves alive, and it usually goes horribly wrong. One of the most disastrous of these attempts happened on Halloween night 1992, which was the 66th anniversary of Harry Houdini's death. On that night, 32-year-old Joseph Burris, who went by the name Amazing Joe, wanted to be handcuffed and then buried in a homemade coffin, 7 feet under 7 tons of dirt and cement, which is about as heavy as a male African elephant. As you may have noted with Shirk, in order to do this stunt, there needs to be some type of trick or illusion to pull it off. Because, let's say his coffin was able to support the weight of the dirt and the cement, the problem is that when the cement dries, it dries at the bottom first, not the top. So even if Burris was able to get out of the coffin, dig up through the dirt, he'd then have to somehow get through hardening cement. He'd also have to do this with a limited amount of oxygen. However, the hardening cement didn't turn out to be Burris's problem. The cement and dirt collapsed on the casket. Unfortunately, Burris wasn't as lucky as the people who attempted to be buried alive, and he sadly asphyxiated to death. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe for more.